Just
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of the day here on the show, we continue with our positional rankings for Week 11 of the NFL season with the running back position. Now, I feel like this is the most settled position in fantasy football right now because we're starting to see a pattern here. We're starting to see the cream of the crop, the tier 1 guys continue to perform at a lofty standard. We're also starting to see some mid-tier guys separate themselves from the pack. We're starting to see potentially tier 3, tier 2.5, I like to call it, guys move up firmly into tier 2 or maybe even low-end tier 1 roles. And so I feel like this group of guys for Week 11 was truly representative of that trend at the running back position especially. All four of them had potential to be guys who, late in the season, can help you, like I said, in a fantasy playoff push, but also continue to consistently perform. That's what I feel best describes all four of these guys. They are paragons of consistency, no matter how they pan out week in, week out. I feel like you can rely upon them almost steadily enough to guarantee them as starters week in, week out. So without further ado, let's jump right into them. Starting off, perhaps the most guaranteed starter of them all, going up against the Steelers in a very important AFC North battle, Derrick Henry. Actually, his kind of most pedestrian performance of the season against Cincinnati in that offensive shootout out of all the players who did not perform, he being the most surprisingly 14.1 fantasy points, but still, even against this tough Steelers defense, this tough physical defensive front, I feel like Derrick Henry is just going to out-physical them. I feel like that's the Ravens' game plan some of the time. When they're facing these very aggressive defensive fronts, they kind of wait them out, potentially do some design runs with Lamar, try and stay in the short to intermediate areas of the field, and then later in the game bring out the big gun in Derrick Henry, who, after this defense gets weared down, can really shine bright later in this game. And so that's what I feel like this game plan will be for the Ravens. He's not necessarily going to do too much early in the game, but look for him especially late in the third into the fourth quarter to really ramp up and get that fantasy production we know he can. And it's going to be important to see how this Ravens team consistently tries to maintain drives against the Steelers defense, because time of possession is going to be key in this game. I feel like the Steelers are going to move a little bit faster and looser on the offensive side of the football with Russell Wilson and his ability to hit some deep shots. With the Ravens, I feel like will be more tactical about it. I feel like they're going to pick and choose their spots to hurt the Steelers defense, because I feel like the Steelers defense is one of the most well-rounded in the league, but I still think there are some flaws in that secondary that I can pinpoint. And I feel like, if Lamar can be efficient early in the game in the pass game, then he can turn it over to Derrick Henry late, and that's where you can really get down and gritty in this game with Derrick Henry. And so I feel like even though the matchup doesn't necessarily look the best, because of his physicality, because of the way the Ravens will game plan for this, I feel like he is a guaranteed starter for this week, potentially the best start of the week in that department. Now, our second guy I want to talk about, potentially a little less consistent throughout the season, but over the past couple of games has really risen and ascended the rankings of the running back position to now be someone who I feel like can start for you for the rest of the season. Also playing this game, by the way, Najee Harris. Not necessarily the best of performances for him against Washington, a little bit of a climb from what we've seen from him in the past 3 or 4 weeks. But against this Ravens team, I feel like he has a little bit of an easier task than even Henry has in this game. The Ravens front, a little bit weakened. They obviously lost their leader in that department in Patrick Queen. Still have a guy in Justin Madubuike who I really like in the center of the field, center of the defense for them. But still, I think a lot of people will complain about this Ravens secondary, but I think this Ravens defensive front is a little bit susceptible. And so, if they don't generate pressure, if they're not aggressive in the run game, if they don't set the edge, set the tone, and dictate the line of scrimmage, then Najee Harris will go off against them. And he can get into the second level. And I feel like, the Steelers' offensive line has been steadily improving week in, week out. And so, I feel like, should the Steelers play well in terms of their line play, dictate the line themselves, then Najee Harris can be someone who can really create explosive plays with his after contact ability and getting into that second level, because second level runs are going to be key as well in this game. Not just time of possession. Because if your running backs can create the occasional explosive play, chances are that will play into the Steelers' strengths, because they might want this game to turn into a shootout, right? Because they feel they can take advantage of the Ravens' defense. And no matter how many points Lamar puts up, they feel they can put up more. So I feel like second level runs, especially for a guy like Najee Harris, will be integral into who wins this game. So look for Najee Harris to kind of be the more effective and efficient of the two in that department in this game. And that is why I feel, in terms of fantasy production, he will be someone you should monitor for this weekend as well. And the third guy, perhaps a little less consistent than both of these guys already mentioned, but I still like him in my personal fantasy team. Week in, week out, it's going to depend on the matchups a little bit more with this guy, but this one I feel like he can take advantage of in terms of how aggressive he might want to play. And this is James Cook against the Chiefs. Still had 15.5 fantasy points versus Indy, not too shabby in that department, but this is a different animal for the Bills. And I feel like this Chiefs run defense is perhaps the best in the National Football League, if not the best overall defense as well. And so what the Bills need to do is try and create as many chunk plays as possible. And no back, I believe, is better in the league at doing that than James Cook. One of the more physical early down backs in the National Football League. And I feel like, the way the Bills might go about it is they might want to stretch the Kansas City front out a little bit, go a little bit horizontally along the line with their play. But I still feel like, running it up the gut with James Cook could be an effective strategy to really try and attack that interior of the line, while with Chris Jones and Karlaftis playing some of their best football. And so, yes, it's a risky pick, but I still feel it favors James Cook if they are aggressive in their run schemes. It's all going to come down to how Joe Brady views this game, because I feel like he might want Josh Allen to have a little bit more control in this one, but also wants to protect the football as well. So it's going to come down to a steady diet of James Cook runs, potentially a little bit more screen action than we've seen from the Bills over the past couple of weeks, and that plays into this James Cook role here on the offensive side of football. It should be a very exciting game, a huge chess match of one that I feel will favor the Chiefs early on, but like I said, it's all about wearing down that front. Nobody truly has tried it to good results, but if there's anyone who I feel can help it and most importantly elevate their offense by doing it, it's James Cook, because he is someone who, like I said, isn't necessarily going to always be important and versatile in the run game, but also in the receiving game as well. And should they go to the screen early and often, that's where he's going to make his bread and butter in this one. So look for James Cook to be highly effective in this one as well. But our final running back I'm going to talk about did not necessarily perform well last night. Pretty disappointing performance from him against Miami. But against the Pats, I feel like can be more effective. Even though, this Pats defense is a little bit stingier than I thought, I still think Kyren Williams is going to be someone to monitor. 11.2 fantasy points actually against that Miami defense last night. And I think that was just a minor blip for the Rams. It was not indicative of what I think the Rams will look like for the rest of the year. What I think they're going to look like is a truly complementary offense where Kyron Williams is effective in the run, can get to the second level, create chunk plays in early downs, and ultimately open up the passing game for Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. So, against the Patriots, a team who, yes, is a stingy kind of defense, but hasn't necessarily beaten anyone of note in that department, I feel like Kyron Williams will round back into form in this one. And I feel like it goes hand in hand with how Matthew Stafford plays as well, because if Matthew Stafford feels pressure, chances are he's going to go to the running game a little bit more. And I was shocked that they didn't necessarily utilize the run as often when Matthew Stafford struggled last night as they should have. And so I think they've learned their lesson in that Miami game, and now they go into New England and figure everything out against a Pats team that's still very weak in every single department. Not just on offense, but on defense still, even though, like I said, it can cause you problems. But I feel like, Kyron Williams has been consistent enough, whereas I'm not too worried about one blip on his record. And so that's why I feel like this performance can be one that gets him back on track and ultimately is indicative of how the Rams can look as they try and make an NFC West title run and, most importantly, try and get into the playoffs as well. Let me know what you think in the comments about my running back rankings, because coming up next, we transition and continue with our positional rankings with the wide receivers. Interesting position to look at for this week. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about them.